Continuous Compliance podcast. I am honored to be here with CTO and co-founder of SimSpace, Lee Rossey. Lee, could you introduce yourself?
Well, sure. Thank you. So CTO and co-founder SimSpace. I spent 15 years at MIT Lincoln Laboratory developing test beds and ranges for the Department of Defense and intelligence community. So a lot of time doing a lot of interesting work over there. And 10 years ago, we started a company with another co-founder, Hutch, F-15 fighter pilot. So extended the notion of cyber ranges to these very realistic environments to the broader sector. So yes, the military, but also large financial institutions, large enterprises throughout the world. And more recently been working with many partners and allies worldwide for that. So we're all about creating very realistic environments for training, testing, exercises, and throughout. So one of our models, train like you fight, get in there, practice, and eventually you get really good at what you're doing.
It was very interesting because, for the past, I would say maybe 15 years, maybe a little bit less, the best practice for preparing yourself for a cyber attack has been a tabletop exercise. And that doesn't quite get the experience that you need when you've actually lived through a cyber attack. So you came up with this idea to simulate a cyber attack, and it's very, very interesting that, some of the folks you're working with are former fighter pilots, because that's sort of exactly what you were trying to build, right? A simulation that can help train people how to fly a fighter jet, right? But how did you think about doing that for a cyber attack?
So first of all, you're right. So the military or militaries have been doing this for many, many years. So whether you're flying or Navy, and Top Gun is a good example, using the flying example there, where you have all the guys, all these top shot pilots, they go out to Vegas or other areas, Las Vegas, and they practice fighting against simulated adversaries. So it's one thing to learn this stuff from a video or a lecture and maybe some airplane stick figures going around, but it's a whole nother one to be in that aircraft, flying dogfights, going through. If you look at the latest Top Gun, how do you practice a mission? How do you understand, I'll call it the operating envelope, and going under that pressure and heat of going through that? So the military has been doing it for decades, to be honest, whether it's fighting or tanks and all that. And there's ranges, traditional ranges throughout the US, whether it's for air or missiles or tanks. Cyber is no different. It's a landscape, it's an environment. So how do you create this highly realistic setup to be able to go through that experience from a training side on attacks? But I don't want to diminish the testing side. So how do you develop and test new technology? How do you understand what's effective or not? How do you practice using that tech? So we've been doing these cyber ranges for 25 years now, when I started back in Lincoln Laboratory to do that. So it's newer commercially, but the ability to have a super realistic, I'll call it dev test environment that allows you to recreate your environment, get those attacks in there, and then really measure and see how well you do. And I love your example of the TTXs and tabletop. Yes, a lot of people do them. They're great, must be done. But there's one thing to say, I would do A, B, C, and D. And there's another thing to put an operator in front of the keyboard, going through those attacks. And it's not just the individual going through it. It's how do they work as a team? How do they communicate? How do they vocalize it or verbalize it and communicate upwards? And I hate to say it, we were with some of these, I think it was about 9 years ago, working with one of the top 5 banks in the US. And you have all the members from the SOC, they're all sitting around. And under pressure, some of the management and leaders caved. So you can kind of picture over here where you know what to do on your own no stress time period. But when the shots are coming in, the attacks are going through, management is pressing on you, Red Bulls only go for so long. It's interesting to see how people behave under pressure and then going through it. And that's when you really find out what works, what doesn't work, not just the tech side, but the people side and the leadership side as well.
A tabletop exercise also has to have the right teammates around the table. I have gone through a tabletop exercise. It's just been execs, and it's been a theoretical exercise where the result is a list of things we should go think about and try to put into place. I've done it with representatives of each of the functional departments that would have to make a choice. But because you don't have your hands on glass, the pressure isn't there. And then and then it's easy to say, oh, well, I would just spin back up my Active Directory. It's quite another to say, I'm going to go spin up the Active Directory right now as a test, because most people don't know how to do
that. Beautiful example. And I'll say that you're right. It does cross departments, both technical and leadership and all that. I remember when we were doing our first exercises, one of the big banks, it was just the SOC. It was just a security team. But very quickly became, to your point, well, to make this change, I got to call the infrastructure guys with the firewall. And to make this other change, I need to call in the domain controller or the exchange guy to revert and go back. So we started quickly expanding out to, I'll say, the IT side of it and the infrastructure side, because in those cases of response, we didn't just want to, I'll use the word white label or white card the thing. It's like, I would do X if this happened. No, let's actually go through it. Let's see how well you can actually recover from the setup. And the other interesting one was I'll call it the business impact versus the cyber impact. And one of these examples, for example, it was a banking, it was a financial institution, so it was more banking focused. And we had models of automatic teller machines and bank payment systems, so Swift-like transaction components. And the attacker had made it through the network, got through the firewalls, got through the network, got into all the system, golden ticket. So fully compromised the network, got into all the ATM machines. And the security guy was like, okay, I want to pull all the network offline to recover. And this is where the business guy was like, easy there, buddy. Pulling off the ATM machines worldwide for a top 5 bank. We're going to exercise a little bit more caution. How about you fight through the attack? How about you figure out what you can do to kind of get them out or restore it without having to pull it offline? Because when you pull it offline, to your point, it's the leadership, it's not the marketing, the PR, the legal. There's all kinds of other groups that come into, well, why did you shut down? And the ticker price. And their job was fight through and work with the other groups to be able to do that. And you don't really get that experience unless you got to go through these these ranges, these live environments to be able to actually see how they react.
How much should a company really do to prepare? Now, I think a simulation is the next generation of tabletops. I think a simulation is where people should be, because I think the tabletops just got too theoretical, too academic, and people end up sending folks that don't have decision-making authority because everybody else is, busy running the business. I think a simulation is a really interesting activity and exercise. And what we're seeing is that everybody wants to participate in it because they want to test themselves. They'd like to see if they know how to fly a fighter jet, right? And get tested with what happens in the moment. The question is how much should a company do? And the thought I want to take you through is this. I try to find relatable analogies because most people are not cybersecurity experts. So if you think about your home, I don't have a backup for my stove. I don't have a backup for my AC or heat. I might have a generator, but I don't have backups for these systems. And one of the things many of the things that you learn in a simulation or in a tabletop is that any one of these systems could go down or be impacted by a ransomware attack. And the question is how do you get back up and running? What is your cyber resilience strategy for a critical business tool? And so back to my question, how much should a company do to prepare for that? You cannot really have a duplicate business of every tool. I mean, it's just so expensive and it's so hard to maintain. So your thoughts on that?
I'm going to give you a slightly longer-winded answer to this because it's an interesting one. So I think part of the problem is a lot of, I'll call it large enterprises. Let's just say large enterprises have already spent a lot of money on tools and people and to some degree process. By process, I mean they've written out the playbooks, they've written out what they want to do. They bought a lot of tools almost to a fault. So when I talk to some people about, so what we want to be able to create in the range is, give me your top 10 tools. Give me the ones that are going to be the most relevant, the ones you really want to be able to use during an incident if something happens. And I asked the question of, well, what are the tools they use? And somebody respond back with 2 of everything. And that they're a little bit joking, but the point over here is, on average, companies have about 50 tools. Financials have about 140 tools. And the reality is they don't use half the tools that they have because they don't have that many operatives to know how to use them. So I think the first step is to figure out which of those tools that you have that you want to recreate in the range are actually the ones that have any value. Which are the ones that somebody's going to use when you go into an incident to do that? So the first question is, all right, out of all those tools, which are the right ones? And the answer may be like 20 or 30, not 70 or 80, because you're not going to use 80 tools in the middle of an incident. Half of those you may never have even logged into before. So why try during that one? So how do you make sure you have the right tools? You've trained the people on those tools. So if you were to go through a crisis, now you can actually experience it. And so in my mind, people have spent a lot of money, again, on the tools. They've done a good job there. What they generally lack, and what we find are the weaknesses, is not in the tools, but it's in the tuning. And most importantly, it's in the response and recovery. And that's on the people side. So the tech is going to be only so good, and it's going to do a good job of, hardening, trying to find, detect, all that stuff before an attack. But when somebody gets in somehow, the real question is respond, recover, restore the systems for doing it. So that's people. That's the teams working together, honing in quickly on the tools there. So it's the incident response, it's the threat hunting. And I'll put another edge on this one, which is most of the operators are generally just looking at alerts. They're just looking at blips that come out of a particular tool, and that's how they start hunting. But the sophisticated adversaries are tuning in so they get past the tools. So if an adversary gets through your defenses and now is in your network and moving around and getting to some important systems and doing a ransomware in your example over here, I spearphished a user, got in, didn't get caught, got in, the user, the attacker escalates up privileges, moves around, gets into the DC, encrypts the data, starts doing command and control, lots and lots of artifacts that are being left behind into each one of those tools. The sophisticators know how to do that. And now the challenge is, how do the teams, really understand how to hunt, IR, incident respond, and then go through this? That's how I think where that experience comes in. Because again, the sophisticated guys are going to be testing their attacks against the tools that people have, whether it's going to make some tools up, Splunk or Palo Alto or Fire or SentinelOne. They know what the tools are, and they're going to craft the way around it. And this comes down to, again, detecting, responding, recovering. And I would say that last piece, and this is to Commvault's benefit, and what I really liked about what I saw a lot of RSA recently, is even the exercises that we do, when we do the training and exercising the assessments, we generally stop at the recovery part. We just white card that part at the end, which says, okay, cool, we found it. It took us X amount of time. This is what we detected and not. And then, let's recover. We never go through that recovery part aspect of it.
Yeah, it's a good point. One of the things that you said, which it hadn't occurred to me, when you think about doing a simulation like this or preparing for a cyber attack, there is a business rationalization that occurs as well, which I don't know that there's another exercise that occurs naturally in. Whenever you have new leaders, they bring in their preferred tools, and you have a procurement team that is processing this information. But when does the left hand talk to the right regularly to say, okay, you're bringing in this new tool, but then do you need these other two? And there are a lot of companies, Commvault is one of them, that has a process that every single tool we have has an executive sponsor, and every single tool has to be signed off by that executive sponsor on a regular basis. But not a lot of companies have that sort of, hygiene. And as a result, you kind of end up with more than what you need, which is why people don't know where to start first or how to choose what to apply a business continuity plan to. So a simplification and a rationalization of what you actually need.
Honestly, it comes down to cost. And this is one of those things that people talk about preparedness, and preparedness is key in readiness, and you want to do that. But there's a whole nother element of cost and cost reduction. Can I do my job as effectively as I can, but spend the least amount of money to do that? So one of those areas is, can I get rid of the tools that are just not needed? Maybe I bought it 10 years ago and we never got around to kind of getting rid of it. Or maybe there's, you go to any one of the conferences, all kinds of new tools every year. Sure, you can kind of try some of them out and deploy them, but get rid of the ones that you had before or they go through. So that's where I like and a lot of our customers use the range to actually do those measurements. Let me get a model of the network with the current stack. Let me run through all these attacks and figure out which tools are really providing the most bang for the buck, that ROI question. And the ones that really don't have much, and again, you can use the example here of antivirus versus EDRs. An EDR, a good one, will do all the job of the old antiviruses. All right, at some point, get rid of it. Just because it was around, you want to start reducing that. And same thing with the evolving landscape. As you start looking at just your traditional IT, there's this whole cloud element. The cloud element has a whole other set of security tools. And depending on your business, you may be dealing with operational technology. So that's a whole other landscape that's going on. So as your data and your system evolves, your security tools and teams also evolve, but it shouldn't be just, let me spend more and more money. The answer should be, let me figure out which ones are really the right ones now and reduce your spend on the other one. Because the second order effect is less tools means that the people that you have are better trained in using those tools when you need it. And those exercises do help quantify some of these. I'll give you one last nugget, which is during the exercises, we actually sometimes take out the tool that somebody is used to. And I'll use Splunk as an example. So a good adversary will start blinding the defenders. And so again, if they don't have the SIM anymore, how well can it continue to do their job in the middle of attack without it? So do they know how to go beyond that particular tool to still do the job if it was taken out one or another? So it's good to have some depth, but they need to know how to use it and and go through with it.
Yeah, so edit the tools that you have kind of on a continuous basis. And then, I mean, that feeds right into check your access privileges. The concept of least privilege access and understanding who has access to what in the environment is really important. People don't spend a lot of time on that either. Can you talk a little bit about that?
That's huge. I've seen, I'll make a broader example. So that's a big one. The other one is sometimes I've seen people add a firewall just because the compliance check said add a firewall, but the rule set was jokingly any. So anything was allowed to go through, or they didn't update the rules on it for like 3 years for it, but they had a firewall. So great, but not great. I'd say the access is important. Same thing with all the zero trust. Add some segmentation to your network so things can't bounce around from one segment to another. Many networks used to be pretty flat. Now they are getting a lot more segmented, getting down to some of those elements. Access control, all that, really important, and how to test it. That was one of those examples that we ran in exercises, back to your technology and people, is that was one of the findings that they had coming through with it, which is, hey, tool-wise, pretty good, people-wise, pretty good, but the red teamers were all over the credentials, all over the access within there. And it wasn't until the red team started showing all of those privileged accounts that they started using and abusing to get around the network that the light bulb went off on some of the teams to start going in and working through and dealing with that. So that's a challenge, but I think it's broader. And the more mature organizations do try and tighten things up. And again, that's especially also true with a lot of the cloud assets that are out there, is managing access controls, all that.
So let's talk a little bit about cybersecurity training. Not everybody is going to go through a recovery range or a simulation. But that doesn't mean that not everybody has responsibility for protecting an environment that we all have access into. So what kind of cybersecurity training and on what cadence have you found to be, the most beneficial?
Yeah, I'll put it on a couple of different layers. I think annually or semi-annually is good for the larger organization. So if we're doing these larger exercises, we may want to bring in the broader teams, the security team, the IT team, the leadership, go through an annual exercise/assessment. I say assessment because sometimes it's good to get an independent report on how good you're doing, what areas are you strong, what areas are you weak. It's still on the range, but it's, again, you want to push to failure in terms of the tech, failure in terms of the people, find the weak spots and go through that. So I think a yearly cadence helps with that. If the team is very large, like a multinational with SOCs all around the world, perhaps in the US, Europe, Asia Pacific, maybe you want to increase the frequency to kind of go through more of those teams. But then I would say that there's probably some regular drills, some regular training at more the team level. So for example, let's go through some threat hunting or some incident responding at some frequency, or let's retest some of the tools and controls and going through that. So perhaps annual, semi-annual for the larger events to really test out this year's team with this year's set of tools, because the tools evolve, and the network. Let's really re-practice everything we learned, because to some degree, it's also expensive. Getting everybody on there, getting everybody away from their jobs to go through that. You learn a lot, but it is a bit of an impact to your day-to-day job. So I'd say annual, semi-annual, but then I would encourage a lot of these sub-teams to do these drills.
A lot of people think that this training is a check-the-box exercise, mainly because there are a lot of companies who sell check-the-box sort of training. Have you ever seen training have a direct link to, a significant difference in an actual cyber attack?
But I think the more interesting one, and this is more for a foreign government. This is a government over in Europe that we work a lot with trying to build up. So they had the range, they had the teams on it. We've been working for a couple of years of how to do incident response, how to do threat hunting, not just the individual training, but as a team, get in there, hunt through. And within the last 6 months, a nearby government gave them a tipper, which is, hey, something funny is going on here. There's another foreign government in your network. So they started going down, hunting, recovering, finding it on their own, detecting and blocking the attack, patching the system. And the key here is on their own. So they didn't have to call in Mandiant, and I love Mandiant, but they didn't have to call somebody else to kind of clean up on I-9 or another government. And they did it by themselves, and they were able to do it fast enough so that real damage didn't happen. As you know, once an attacker is in there, they're in there for weeks, months, it can start creating some real damage. So I think they called us up on the side after and said, hey, by the way, a lot of the training that you're doing has tangible practice here, because we're able to actually use that to be able to start finding people in our network and actually eradicating them before real bad stuff would happen to them.
Lee, what would you say is unique about the recovery range experience?
I would say it's the experience of going through the full life cycle attack with hands-on keyboard. And the hands-on keyboard part is the real part it was really interesting to me. And by that, I mean, it's yes, the presentation and the walking through, you have a business, you're running, this is what you're doing and going through, but having that hands-on keyboard, allowing people to, like customers and others, sit on the keyboard, experience the network, look at the website that's running, look at the network, seeing the attack unfolding. So in this case, it was a spear phishing email. So live network with security stack fully running, all the typical commercial tools that you would see. A typical entryway in that bypasses a spear phishing email to the user, compromise that user, laterally moves around, gets into some system, eventually gets over to the web server. And you're watching the web server, and you eventually see it actually get encrypted and going down. And you're walking through each one of those aspects. And again, there's the technical side, there's the leadership side, there's the reporting, but then you're giving the power to the guys on there. Splunk to run some queries, and Commvault to be able to actually look at what it's seeing and the recovery. And it's the first time that I saw it where you're tying together the tool itself to an incident with hands-on to be able to actually go through the investigation of what happened. All that noise and chaos that typically happens during one of these high-profile incidents is, okay, you're on there, you're seeing the systems. How do you actually identify what's happening? How do you actually provide some details and clarity to leadership, which are pounding you, understandably, what's going on and what do I do next and when can I get back? And I liked how it also showed that, like many enterprises that have built up their enterprise over 40 plus years, you have your traditional on-prem systems. That's what makes the money. That's what's operating. But then you showcase some new products, cloud-based products, to be able to say, hey, while you are actually going through this recovery and understanding and restoring, let's use the cloud tools to kind of quickly bring you back up to go through. And part of the area that stuck to me was the dollar meter thing running, where I think you had some good examples there. Depending on the size of the business, you're spending or you're losing between tens of thousands to maybe even $1 million every minute or 15 minutes that's going through. So every minute that you're down, that clock is really ticking in terms of losses and trying to recover. So the ability to kind of use the tools under high pressure environments, see them actually get exercised and how you use them, really compelling, really good.
Yeah, it sounds like it's a difference between taking a test on paper and about how to fly a plane and sitting in, a simulation. And so that when you make a choice to turn that plane left, you feel the effects of that. And then you have to deal with the impacts of the choice that you made.
One thing to watch is another thing to do it. And again, this is all about muscle memory. That's one of the things about the military is train like you fight. How do you experience it? How do you actually go through 2, 3, 4 experiences like that? So when it happens in the real world, you're not looking up the playbook and figuring out what do I do next and going through. That really highlighted that time to restore is really time is money. And the more you've done it before, you practice it, you're not bouncing around in a bad way. Now that's effective. And what the range and these recovery aspects are really doing is showing you how to quickly bring up the teams, communicate across your teams of departments and the leadership, and really exercising that.
So I can't imagine that a single business leader of a company shouldn't experience this. What do you think is the most likely takeaway for a majority of business leaders who go through recovery range? What do you think they should come out of this having their minds changed about?
Everybody's going to say that they're ready until they really try it and find out whether they are or not. So to one of your questions earlier, every CISO and every board thinks that they're in good shape, but how do you measure it? How do you know? How do you exercise it? So this is quantify, try it, show me. Show me is a good example here. It's like, yep, you say you're ready. show me that you kind of go through it. So if you start putting your team on there during one of these attacks and you can see how well they respond, react, recover, you can measure it. Did it take them 2 minutes, 5 minutes, 15 minutes? So quantifying that experience. So A, there's the training out, but B, quantifying time to detect, time to recover, or time to respond, time to recover, and also the precision and accuracy. Did you find the attack? How well did you find it? How good was it? That really starts measuring the performance of the team, measuring in terms of time and accuracy. And that can kind of bring up to leadership for how good they really are. Because it's really hard to kind of get empirical data on how well you deal with a recovery and an incident until you really have it. And that's part of it. But again, it's also the communication. It's the communication between the teams that's really important. I've seen some managers being excellent technically, but not being able to articulate up to leadership a good A status, B some courses of action. Here's what I recommend you to do given what we know right now.
I think that's fantastic. Recovery range takes cybersecurity training from tell me to show me, and enables a team to really practice the closest you can get to a cyber attack without being in it. Well, we are thrilled to be partnering with you, and we think this recovery range is a real game changer. So thank you for your time with the podcast, and we will be checking in with you probably in a couple of months and be talking about some examples that customers have had using the recovery range.